Hello and welcome to Money Discourse. Today we have a very special guest, Raj Kapadia, who now resides in Lusaka, Zambia. Raj previously worked in London as an auditor for PwC for 8 years and now runs FundLink, a microfinance firm for SMEs. And today we're going to be discussing the Zambian economy and the opportunities that may present themselves as Raj believes Zambia is set to become the premier destination for investors in Africa. Raj, welcome. Would you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Jason, and pleasure to be on the podcast. So, like you said, I've done 8 years at PwC, 4.5 in Zambia, 3.5 in London. My primary experience relates to banking and capital markets, but broad range of experience in other industries as well. And since then, for the past 1.5 years or so, been working with my own microfinance, financing the SME space in Zambia, which is sort of a thriving space at the moment.
Raj, why don't we start by going into why Zambia was an unattractive place to invest and why it's getting better?
Yeah. So I think big change happened last year in August. We had a general election and we had a change of government. So that's the change in the ruling party. That is the fourth time we've had a change in sort of the actual party in Zambia. And Zambia has always sort of been considered a beacon of democracy in Africa for that very reason, due to peaceful handovers of power, right? So that sort of change has spurred a change in sentiment about the country, its outlook and the like. But going to your question, right, in the past, we had 10 years under the previous government, and it was sort of marred with a period of economic instability, bad policy making, a huge increase in corruption, poor sort of economic decisions all around, and it just sort of soured the mood around the country. The stock market was literally flat or in decline for 10 years. There was nothing happening there. The currency moved from when that government came in at 4.70 to the dollar, right, all the way up to 22 in the 22s, right? So it had a huge. The economy was crippled basically. It went on a debt borrowing spree, right, to fund all sorts of white elephant projects, which were also marred in corruption. It was borrowing for consumption as well domestically, so domestic debt just went through the roof. That affected the growth in private sector credit because the government was just absorbing all the liquidity in the market. So foreign debt moved up from close to very low, $1-3 billion, all the way into the mid tens, $15-20 billion in external debt, right, over that period. And there was very little to show for it. So one would expect if so much sort of foreign flows were coming in through borrowing, that would result in economic growth, right? But the opposite happened instead. We were growing when they came in about, this is in 2011, around 7% was our GDP growth. When they left in 2020, it dropped all the way up to -2. And that was a steady decline. It was not because of COVID necessarily. The impact COVID had on the Zambian economy was primarily limited to tourism, but yeah, that was a steady decline over the 10 years into negative growth, and then we've since had a slight bounce back. So it was inflation as they were leaving peaked at 24%. That was last year, mid last year. So everything was going wrong basically. And it's one of those where creditors kept lending money, right? So third of our external debt, you'd say, is Chinese. Third is private lenders, commercial lenders, and then slightly less than a third would probably be multilaterals, bilaterals. So that was sort of the breakdown, and I think they caught on quite late in terms of the West and everybody else in terms of what was actually happening on the ground, which is why I normally say caution in terms of relying on these Western media reports, S&P ratings and the like, which gave Zambia pretty decent ratings, but on the ground you just knew that these guys weren't going to do anything with money. It was just being squandered. And that sort of has led us to where we are right now. And led to the change in government where the people decided enough was enough and they wanted change and they got change. And since then, we've sort of ushered in new leadership. We've got a president who's sort of more capable. He seems to have the country at heart and is making sort of decisions that are taking the country in the right direction and is sort of moving the country more westwards, I would say, in terms of allegiance. as well. So it's suddenly become a darling of the West, I would say.
Yeah, I see this New York Times article saying Zambia and its new president are still on their honeymoon. He's hailed as a miracle worker for turning around fortunes of South African country. But how much would you agree with like this type of headline right now? I mean, it's a very
So I mean, in terms of what he says, yes. So I mean, on paper, yes, it looks like that. On the ground, I'd say nothing has changed per se economically as yet. But you can see the opportunities are now there. The stability is there. So maybe if we walk through some of the key things that have changed. So in terms of currency, right, you can sort of see like the Zambian kwacha, like I was explaining to you. If you look at the 10-year, right, you can see the low base, right, and it's basically gone on a one-way journey all the way to this point here, which is just a week before elections. And then expectations started to build that potentially there was going to be a change of government, and flows started coming in the country, and the currency sort of started appreciating. So looking at that, so we got to the peak. It sort of dropped over here. This is basically inflows of offshore money that came in into the bond market just prior to elections. There was a period up to the actual elections on the 12th, and then the announcement came around the 15th or 16th, and then the currency crashed again, appreciated in terms of the Zambian kwacha all the way into the 15s. And that's basically just confidence, right?
So I mean, it looks looking at that chart, it definitely seems like the Zambian kwacha has outperformed in general, because I mean most currencies against US dollar over this past year have been smashed.
Yes.
But if you look at this kwacha, it's actually held in pretty well relative to the dollar, which is quite a show of strength, right?
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it was best performing currency in the world, and even probably right now, it's one of the best performing currencies in the world against the dollar. It sort of has this where it drops when there's major events, and then it sort of slides back up. Then you have a major event, sort of slides back down, slides up, goes back up, and then it sort of it follows that pattern basically. The central bank sort of limits how much it can go up, but it doesn't want to limit the appreciation side for some reason. Kind of makes sense, but yeah. So yeah, it's been range bound for the past year or so, and yeah, this has basically helped a lot. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of the sort of GDP, you can see where we were when the previous government came in. We were almost touching 8%. Then it was a steady decline down, all the way into negative. A bit of a bounce back last year, and now we're sort of ready for steady growth for the next couple of years before potentially it takes off over here. Inflation, similar story. It started at single digits. Obviously, when your currency declines, and Zambia is an import-based economy, we import almost everything. So when the currency slid, inflation also sort of took off. As you can see, we sort of peaked at on average 24%, and since it's been tapered, and that's also been helped by the sort of stronger currency. So right now,
10% rate is in line with all the Western economies right now. So that's pretty staggering. I could not believe that.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, we can feel it in the sense of prices are not increasing on the ground as much. They are still increasing, of course, but yeah, it's a marked change where every week you go to the supermarket and prices are just going up every single week. Obviously, when a currency moves like I showed you, shops generally don't drop prices as you'd expect because they want to sort of cash in on the normal sort of profits that they can make to catch up on all the, I guess, the tough times they've had previously. But yeah, so that's sort of what's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so interesting. In terms of like the opportunity in what you see, especially under this new government, I mean, Africa's bread and butter is the exports, especially coffee beans. That's probably, that's Africa in general. Like, what's the major export in?
Okay, it's copper. So 70%, copper accounts for about 70% of our exchange earnings, and it's the key commodity basically, and that's why it's one of the key sort of business cases for the country. Obviously, everyone knows that demand for copper is just going to keep on increasing over the years to fuel sort of the movement towards green energy, right? Electric vehicles and the like, right? So we're sort of primed. The government's putting a lot of sort of focus on that area. Currently, Zambia is the second largest producer of copper. We used to be the biggest, but the DRC has taken over. We've sort of been stuck around 800,000 tons a year for the past, let's say 10 years. That's sort
So
of
I mean, but copper is like 70%. It's been like your bread and butter. But in terms of this new government, where do you think it'll become, a lot more of the services will start getting a bit more play, like what you're doing with your business, or do you think it's still much more export driven based on commodities?
Yeah, so copper remains a key focus area for the government and the country. They want to ramp up sort of production from 800 to 3 million. That's sort of their target over the next 10 years. If we achieve that, that'll be good. But apart from that, we've always been on a sort of a diversification drive. So diversification towards tourism is one key area. It accounts for less than probably around 5% of our GDP at the moment. To bring that into double digits. I don't know how much sort of about Zambia, but we've got amazing tourist attractions. We've got the Victoria Falls, which you've of course heard of, which is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. A third of the country is under sort of what you call game management area, which is where there's animals and wildlife. We've got the second largest national park in Africa. So it's the Kafue National Park, which is bigger than Wales. Tremendous wildlife, waterfalls all over the country, water bodies. It's a very scenic place, and there's huge potential tourism-wise. So that's sort of an area they're looking to unlock. We've got fantastic lodges and stuff and accommodation in Lusaka over here. There's so many hotels popping up, and across the country. So we can see investment is coming into that area and creating activity. And then other than that, of course, agriculture, I'd say, is another key area. That Zambia has a lot of arable land that's untapped, and that's another focus area, and a lot of investment does come into that area as well. So we are we're landlocked, right? Which means we're bordered by about 7-8 countries, just in our vicinity. So we want to become the breadbasket for sort of our region, and that's where agriculture comes in as well. So it's agriculture. You talk about sort of services, it's there. We've got about 18, 19 banks over here. It's been pretty much the same for a number of years now. We haven't had many big new entrants into the market. Barclays left when they left Africa. That was a few years ago. Since then, there's not been much sort of new players coming into that market per se. But I think we're well catered in terms of financial services players.
Africa's always been very interesting for me. I mean, right now, a lot of these markets that we invest in daily, the US, the European markets, are so matured. It is very difficult to bring and find any type of opportunity. And we've all tried it with the crypto space as well, but we're just getting burned to the bone as the corruption runs rife. But I mean, in Africa, like, first of all, in Zambia or Africa in general, I mean, where do you think it's heading? And obviously, we've had this war in Ukraine, and a lot of African exports and imports have been affected by it. So, I mean, how is it sort of dealing with that moving forward? And yes, I mean, where do you think it is? Do you think this is where the money should be going to right now?
So Africa has, I think, for a very long time been seen as the next sort of emerging market frontier. Hasn't quite always panned out. We see a lot of multinationals trying to come into the market before understanding the market and getting it wrong and then leaving. And that sort of gives a bad image to Africa. But I think for companies, investors who are willing to do their sort of research, get on the ground, actually understand what's happening here, where the opportunities lie, doing it correctly, basically, rather than sort of relying on sort of the reports they read in the media of these rating agencies and the like. They'd be able to make better decisions. So in the context of Zambia, I mean, in relation to Russia, I think it has impacted us quite a bit. Obviously, globally, fuel prices rose, same over here, and that's impacted us over the past 6 to 9 months quite significantly. It's affected economic activity slightly. Zambia produces quite a lot of, has quite a big focus on the agriculture space. It's a growth area for us, and we rely significantly on importation of fertilizer. And Russia being a large producer of fertilizer, obviously prices of fertilizer have gone up quite significantly from about 4 times.
So how do they address that? Has fertilizer prices come down? Because I know initially when the whole war started, the whole talk was about the rising fertilizer and how it's really impacting the African market. But where do we stand now, 10 months on?
So obviously we import, so there's lag, right? So whilst globally the commodity has come down in price, depending on when contracts were locked in and imports began, I think we've bought at close to the high end. to right now. So it's going to take a bit of time for that to filter through. So I'd say on average, we're probably paying $1,100 a ton for our what they call urea.
Where was it prior to the war? What was their price prior to the war?
So
I can't
it
remember.
was, I mean, it was about 300, 400.
Jeez. Yeah.
So it's a lot higher. I wouldn't say we were actually, as Zambia, paying the right price previously.
It went through two middlemen, right? Did it go through one person,
Exactly.
then the middleman, and then the next middleman,
Yes.
and then at the end?
So what happens here basically is the government is the biggest buyer. They run an annual program called FISP, Farmer Import Support Program over here. And basically that's sort of handing out fertilizer, seeds, grain to small scale farmers, right? Just to sort of kick off production and support them at that level. So yeah, you can imagine when prices were $300, $250, the government was paying about $1,000. and now and now when the price has risen all the way up to 800, 900, 1,000, they're paying about 1,200. So yeah, it's more fair, I would say, right now.
So basically, they're not taking as big a cut. All the middlemen have been squeezed, as that $800 to $700 is all of a sudden just diminishing, right?
Of course, yeah.
If I wanted to invest, so let's just say I wanted to invest in Africa or Zambia in particular, what would you say is the best avenue for a foreigner to invest? Is there is there a Zambian ETF? Like, what's the best way to get access to the market? Or in terms of investing in some of the projects that is there a good program for foreigners to even invest in it? Or is it mainly you've got to be a homegrown person to get access to a lot of what is available in the country?
So look, traditionally investors, you've got the bond market, right? Government securities market. That's the primary place where offshores tend to invest, right? First on, right? You get yields at the moment of about 24-25% on government bonds. That's 2 years plus.
Wow.
And 1 year money, it's up to about 14%. So in terms of real returns, that's fairly good, right? The currency is largely stable, I'd say. As you saw, it's holding its sort of fort against the dollar. So that's where they tend to go first, right? Then you've got the stock exchange, right? The Lusaka Stock Exchange. It's a very small sort of exchange. We've got 20 odd companies over there, not very liquid.
What's the biggest market? What's the biggest company on that exchange? What's the biggest market cap?
So about $400 or $500 million. That's sort of as big as it gets, and that's an energy company. There's a few banks on there. There's a few manufacturing companies. It's a small market. It was dead for 10 years, like I said, and then straight after elections, it's gone on a sort of a tear. So the index was at about 4,000, and now it's in the 7,000s. So that's the same sort of investor sentiment. It sort of drove the market up finally after a very long time. So that's the space. There's still opportunity there. There's undervalued companies there. You find PE ratios of about 3, 4, 5, right? You can get dividend yields of 15-20%, right? If you really look into it. So it's not a bad space. It's tax-free, the gains. There's no capital gains tax in Zambia. There's no taxation on dividend income from the stock exchange as well. So in terms of tax,
is that for that's for the locals, right? So, but I guess for a foreigner, you just have to adhere to your own tax codes in the country.
I guess yes.
Yeah.
So domestically, you won't be hit, but yeah, I guess as you remit offshore, then probably, yeah. So there's a stock exchange. We're hoping to get more listings, getting things more active. So we'll see how things go. Then from the stock exchange, so we talked about the bond market, the stock exchange, right? And now there's sort of investments, right? Which is what you're sort of talking about. So there's potential. There's what they call the Zambia Development Agency, right? So that's sort of your conduit or route to get into Zambia. You, as an investor, you approach them and sort of see how you can be given incentives. We've got economic zones here. So you invest in an economic zone, you set up a manufacturing plant, you can have zero taxation for the first 5 to 10 years, right? So there's plenty of incentives available to foreign investors if they want to come in to the country. Yeah, so I think it's not as difficult as one would think. Yes, there's multiple licenses and stuff that you'd have to get, so it's quite a process. But you invest in one of these economic zones, you're going to have some great tax benefits. And it's a good place to be. And actually, the pledges are coming in. We just need them to materialize.
So what are the key risks, do you think?
So what's happened in the past is investors coming in without understanding, like I said, the market, the ground, it's Africa is unique, right? And every country is different, right? Western Africa is different, Central Africa is different, Southern Africa is different. The cultures are very different within Africa. You look at Africa as just one country, right? Each market has its own peculiarities that you need to sort of understand. And if you sort of do your groundwork, come here, get a feel for it, talk to the locals, right? Understand, then you should be fine. You also have to understand what sort of resources are available here, right? We don't have like a million cybersecurity experts, right? What we do have is we have a lot of accountants, more the traditional sort of professions, right? That's where the resource base is. You've got laborers as well, so for manufacturing that can work. But yeah, as time goes, people are diversifying into other sort of education fields, and that resource pot keeps growing.
How would this rate compare to other countries in Africa that are up and coming? You know, I mean, it definitely looks like it's one of the more stable ones anyway in terms of the overall inflation and currency.
Mm. So what you'll find is when you come to Zambia, right? Number one, the people are friendly, right? That helps investors, right? The people are people are friendly, right? Number one, the environment is overall stable. We've not had serious political instability, civil wars, that sort of stuff that you find in other sort of areas. Local unrest, strikes, rioting. No, it's a very stable place, right? We've had, as I mentioned, 4 transitions of power, right? That's very impressive for Africa, without barely an issue, I'd say. So the overall environment, is safe, right? That you've got the legal system here, as much as it's not perfect, you could say it works. That obviously protects investor interests. You've got a government which is pro-business right now, right? So they're bringing in incentives. They're trying to lessen the burden of sort of the licensing requirements, what you need to invest in the country, right? So overall, they're trying to make things more pro-business friendly, right? The country as a whole, I think, is placed for growth. We're sort of managing that debt situation. So we're currently running under an IMF program that is agreed a few months ago. And that means in terms of our economy, the government is not going to go berserk in a sense in borrowing again or doing crazy things in terms of expenditure, because now they're under an IMF program for the next few years. We're currently renegotiating our external debt with our creditors and hoping for a sort of a significant write-off or delay in payments, which is going to give more breathing space for the government to sort of invest in more key infrastructure areas like roads and stuff. So infrastructure-wise, if you look at the country, things are coming up all the time. There's a lot of activity, basically. And look, as a foreigner, when you come to this country, I worked in audit, right, with a number of multinationals. Once they come to Zambia, they don't want to leave, right? Guys just want to live here forever. They like the environment. It's a peaceful place. It's not that fast Western life. You get house help, right? There's more space, greener areas, and people like that. So I think if you wanted to move here as well, it's not a bad place. Good schools, right? So if you're coming in to work as well as an expat into the country, you got good schools. Hospitals are there now. I'd say it's very attractive for foreigners at the moment.
I mean, one other thing that I've noticed, about Africa, and I've been seeing some of these tweets just come by my feed lately, is how Africa has somehow not really been that much impacted by COVID. It seems like we've got two. It was there, and now it's sort of petered away. And then you've got China on the other hand that are still strong arming all their people, keeping them all under bunkers. And now you're starting to see a bit of an uprising over there as people getting fed up over these draconian measures to just keep people under this COVID restrictions. But I'm seeing these, all these headlines like Africa is only about 11% vaccinated, but COVID has more or less disappeared. Is that how it is on the ground, or is that just like a clickbait headline?
Tourism probably got affected quite a bit, though.
So the main impact was tourism. That was shut down, basically, really bad. But surprisingly, Zambia's at 70% vaccination rate, right? Wow. You'll be surprised. So
they account for all of Africa, probably.
Well, we've got a small population of 18, 19 million people, right? So not really, but very high vaccination rate. They struggled at first trying to convince people to get vaccinated, but it's been a huge drive, and we've reached pretty good levels, and it's not really talked about anymore. Everything's back to normal here. But in terms of the impact, yes, tourism, it was bad. I think obviously, lots of layoffs in that area, and it's started to kick off, and it's getting back on its feet.
In Zambia, what's the tech scene like?
So I'd say it's sort of coming up right now. We launched 5G 2 days ago. MTN was sort of first network over here to launch 5G. There's these sort of hubs, they call them tech innovation hubs, that have come up over here, and there's actually quite a lot happening in that space slowly. Obviously, there's not a lot of capital behind it, I would say. It seems to move at a slow pace, I would say. People can't just raise money here, right? Because we don't have those flows yet and that interest at the moment, and the local market just doesn't fund these things like you would see in the West, right? So it's slow, it's gradual, but it's there. People are trying all sorts of new things, all the time. So it's definitely coming up, and there's opportunity there. We're always behind, right? So anything you learn or you see on the Western side, just know eventually it's going to come here, right? So there's definitely opportunity to bring ideas from.
Where's the main place? So where's still the main hub in Africa? Is it like Joburg? Is it South Africa? Is that still
Nigeria,
the premier destination in Nigeria as
Kenya,
well?
And Kenya, yeah. I'd say those are the primary areas where things happen, and they actually get the investment flows that side into the tech scene. Here, not so much, but they're trying to push it. There's a lot of, all the time, there's conferences, there's things happening, there's hubs, there's a lot happening in that space, but it's all small scale, I would say.
Do you see shoots of businesses investment from South Africa, for example, coming into Zambia or Kenya?
Look, Uber was a big thing, right? In sort of around, so that we don't quite have Uber here, but there's been a lot of local startups that have come into that space, as well as foreign, Russian, I would say, that's come into the market, and it's really catching on, right? The locals love it. So it's an area that was there to be taken, and it's come, and people have come and taken it, right? But it's still in the major metropolitan areas around the main cities, so there's still the rest of the country, right? So there's opportunity. Everything that happens in the West, it's still to be done here, I'd say. There's small players trying it out, obviously adopting ideas from abroad, but they don't have the financial muscle to sort of take it large scale or do it properly. So you find a lot of the stuff is half baked, not really done nicely. It's So with money and coming into this market, I think there's opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you think? How much do you see of Western markets, Western news? How much do people in Africa even care about what's happening in, let's say, the US or Europe, like Rishi Sunak, Biden, Trump? Like, how much do they even care? Is there even much of a following?
No.
Or
look, what you need to understand is, I'd say 80 to 90% of the population just cares about bread and butter on the table, right? It's that basic, right? It's about meeting ends meet on a daily basis, right? That's the core of it. Then in the more urban areas, like you'd say Lusaka, you've got the slight middle class and upper class, right? There maybe, but even then, it's not something that people talk about, that much, except guys maybe in the financial market space. So it's not really of interest. People are just worried about their daily needs, and that's what drives elections as well. The results, right? It's food on the table. That's what matters. Government performance is determined by food on the table. That's what it is. Cost of living. If you ask any person here, right, the ordinary citizen, what matters to them, it's cost of living and opportunities, right, for making a living and jobs. The very basics, not sort of these
not
big
idealisms, and not
no.
It's just this what it should be, what it should all be about. That's interesting. I mean, I guess that was on the ballot a lot over here on these midterms that just happened right now as well. But
what are typical wages in Zambia? Just along a spectrum of different professions.
So, as an accountant, maybe starting out, you might earn 6,000 kwacha monthly, which is like $400, right, to start off at, and then move upwards from there. And that's sort of the minimum wage. I'll say the general minimum wage is about 3,000 kwacha, which is about $200. Yeah. So, and for domestic workers, it's even lower, right? So you're looking at people living off $2-3 a day, basically.
What can you live for? Like, for what type of accommodation do you get for? Let's just say on a typical like $200-300 a month. What does that get you in terms of accommodation? Is it like that's a very affordable wage? I mean, a livable wage, or is that not a livable wage?
I mean, I'd say it's difficult. So what they call the bread basket here. So the average cost for a family of 4 or 5 is about 8,000 kwacha, which is about $500, right? So you basically need your income, and then you need to supplement it from something else, or maybe your partner needs to be working, right? So what you find, the culture here is everyone works, right? But they've also got, like, let's say those in formal employment, they've also got a side sort of business or hustle, as they call it. So everyone's doing their own thing on the side, right, to sort of supplement their income. And that's sort of the culture here, whether it's farming, so they'll have a small piece of land, they're doing farming on the side, or just any sort of business, selling a few things here and there. And that's sort of how people get by over here.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's such a different reality, but I guess it's the norm in a lot of the parts of the world. And
so what got you interested in microfinancing, and where do you think you can make a difference in the space?
So I think it came from sort of my time in audit, right? So I sort of enjoyed the credit space. I felt like as you review loan books, right, for the various banks and financial institutions, you got insights into different businesses, learning about them, the struggles they have, what they're doing with the money, the profitability and stuff. So I found that quite interesting. And yeah, so thought, looking at this country, one of the biggest problems that people face here, right, is access to financing. And that's sort of a major hindrance. So if you're a small business, right, you go to these traditional banks or larger established micro financial institutions, the requirements are so rigid, right? Like, people here just don't have audited financials, right? They don't have a 3-year track record. They don't have management accounts. They don't have collateral. They don't have all these things that a bank wants, right? So who do they go to? They just can't go to the traditional spaces, right? And that sort of creates an opportunity for guys like myself to sort of look into those markets, offer them an opportunity to come to myself, right? See what they're doing, and on the basis of what they're saying, right, see if you can support them. So it's a high risk space, because you're literally working off a guy who maybe hasn't done any business, right? He's just got. I mean, I focus on the short term space, right? Because the longer it goes, the higher the risks, right? So it's short term, high yield, I would say, and high risk. It's sort of what it is, right? And it's really interesting, seeing what people are trying to do. You get lots of business ideas, just seeing what your clients are sort of doing, and it's an interesting space, and it's huge opportunity, because I'd say 90% of business, the small businesses, just can't access financing, right? And if you're there and you're able to sort of offer a solution, right, then it's there for the taking. But as long as you know that you're going to take hits, and it's high risk.
I mean, let's just say out of every 10 applications you get, if how many people do actually get, considering they can't get it through the bank route and they're coming to someone like you, what is the chances of them getting something? I know it's obviously on an individual basis, case by case basis, but let's just say a sample size of 20 proposals, how many can get financing? What's typical?
So it's I'd say maybe half, right? Or slightly under half. So typically guys will walk in, once you start sort of delving into what it is that they're proposing to do, right? They come to the realization themselves that they've got their math wrong, right? People are generally ambitious, right? And they get contracts, orders, whatever it may be, and then they just find out they've got the math completely wrong, right? So key part of what I do is sort of making sure that I understand what they're doing. So I need to take ownership, basically, of whatever they're doing, right, to cut my risks. So I need to understand what they're doing. So yeah, typically I'd say just under half would sort of go through. And you need to work with them very closely to make sure it pulls through.
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting, because I mean that's a pretty high percentage, I would say. So I guess you are a believer in a lot of the proposals that come through the door, or at least you feel like you. Do you normally just stick at providing short-term financing, or do you ever take a stake in a business and maybe go, right, you know what, this,
I mean, on an individual level, yes, I have. It's gone right and it's gone wrong. I mean, when you're what problem we have here is people see money, and whether it's borrowed or theirs, they think it's theirs. So we've got a very poor credit culture over here. So people run businesses here somehow think revenue is profit for some reason. So
that's the American business model,
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, chances of getting conned are very high here, I'd say, when you're dealing with individuals in a sense. So you just need to be careful. Yeah, I've been conned, so yeah, no.
I could imagine. You know, like corruption still, like you said, it runs deep.
Corruption does run deep here, yes. I'd say there's been a sort of a shift in terms of the tone at the top against corruption. So we can see the sort of what they call the Anti-Corruption Commission is taking a sort of a harder line. There's been a lot of arrests and stuff. We're yet to see prosecutions, but the tone has changed, but corruption remains as always. I think it's a bit endemic over here. And it cuts across, actually. And it's one of the things that increases the cost of doing business. So you as an investor, when you come here to set up shop, right, you need to be aware of the environment you're coming into, right? There is corruption, definitely. And it's not just in government circles, right? It's public and it's private, right? Private sector is as corrupt as government, right? These large multinationals, that's why their performance is hindered, is because their procurement teams are just ripping them off and they don't know. They've not got the right systems and controls in place. So if you want to come into a market like this, there is money to be made, significant amounts, but focus on the systems and control environment so that you control that procurement, right? That's where there's a lot of leakages, and some do it better than others.
I mean, we said it's at the top with the copper buying at $1,000 when it was trading on the market for 200-300. And there you go. Can you imagine when that arb went down? That must have been a bit of a upsetting thing for the people in the government, making a nice little juicy profit there on that. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's just how it is in Africa. But there's a lot of opportunity, and with all this corruption, like you said, just can you imagine how much margins can be improved and everything if you just knew what you're doing, you knew what you had to buy things for, getting it, trying to cut down all of the fat that is on top due to these dodgy suppliers and stuff. I mean, it just, like I said, it just requires someone that just really knows the space, knows what they're doing. I guess that's what you're there for, to help all of these businesses, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, outside Zambia. So if there was any other country in Africa that you would be interested in, or you think, other than the main ones, like which country would that be, would you say? Or do you even have one? Zimbabwe, your next door neighbor, Botswana, all of these guys. Do they run around the same circles, or is like Botswana totally different from Africa and Zimbabwe totally different?
So obviously Zimbabwe has been through a long period of difficulty, right? And it's hard to see where the end is, right, for that sort of in that tunnel. So every now and then things look like they're coming up and then it goes back down. So I wouldn't say it's like Zambia. Zambia definitely has a better outlook. Botswana traditionally has been a more stable investment destination, and it's had more traction. Namibia as well, not bad. And the powerhouses of Africa, obviously South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and to some extent Kenya. Yeah. So I have to be pro Zambia, to be honest, and genuinely I think this is where there's opportunity, right, in many spaces. So yeah, I wouldn't comment too much on other places.
So Raj, tell us about the demographics of Zambia, and are the population very tech literate? What type of technology are they using?
It's a very young population, and that's part of the business case for the country, right? Average age must be in the 20s or 10s even. It's a very young population, and it's growing pretty fast. In terms of tech literacy, it's been growing exponentially, right? Almost everyone has a mobile phone. Almost everyone has smartphones now getting onto. Mobile money is a huge thing here now, which is using your phone for business, transferring money, making payments. I'd say it's getting more popular than even card to some extent in certain areas, right? Where sort of your card machines are just not available. Mobile coverage is literally the whole country now. It's on 4G, like I mentioned earlier. 5G has just come out, so it's on a growth trajectory from that sort of aspect. Yeah, so people are clued on. They use their phones. Social media is huge here. WhatsApp is sort of the key sort of messaging platform, and it's used for business. Facebook is used for business for so many people. It's actually been a game changer over here, and it's increased sort of I think coverage of businesses where they can go, the markets they can meet, and it's been pretty good.
Interesting.
I mean, what would you say would be out of the Zambian traded names? Because I have been looking, and there's not obviously a direct exposure to trade through like some US ETF or something like that, but there are some obviously tradable names like Zambeef and there's Standard Chartered, which obviously has a presence in Africa, but obviously it's a much bigger company. What it was tradable on the LSE, but in terms of the company on the Lusaka Stock Exchange or that, I mean, which companies do you like in this current environment, especially with the new government, and who you think might prosper the most under this new regime?
Yeah, so easy exposure like Zambia, like you mentioned, it's on the AIM in London, so it's quite easy to get into that. It's been, I'd say, undervalued for a very long time. They're going on a sort of a huge debt-fueled growth story at the moment. They're raising $100 million to invest into agriculture. So and that's the space that government is pushing as well. So that looks like a potential opportunity, I'd say. Yeah, you mentioned Standard Chartered. That's another one that I've been looking into quite a bit. They've sort of gone all out in terms of fintech. Sort of, they had quite a big presence in Zambia. In fact, that's the oldest bank in Zambia. They came here first. They just shut down all their branches and went completely digital, and left like two branches, and completely shocked their customer base. And it's it's caused a lot of aggro, but it's created huge opportunities for them because now people can apply digitally. It's much like a Monzo, and they found that more people are opening accounts than they were when they had a branch network, right? So people are adapting to technology as well over here, and they're getting more accustomed to it. So that looks like a good opportunity as well. And to invest in the Osaka Stock Exchange, I mean, there's not that many companies, right? Like I mentioned earlier, you just need to pick a broker, set up an account, and then just transfer the funds and pick which company you want to invest in. And there's so few information is available online, annual reports and the like. You look into them, you don't need to do very deep analysis, right? You can kind of see some of them just tell the story themselves. I mean, if you've got a P ratio of 3 or 4, I mean, it's not that difficult to make a decision, right? Just know where the growth is, and that's where the opportunities lie.
So with the PEs so low,
yeah,
in boom times, what have the PEs kind of expanded to, or has there been a boom time in recent memory?
So we'd need, it's right now, right? And then prior to that, 10 years before now, right? When the market was going up. And then even then, I mean, you're looking at maybe 10 or so. You don't really have many companies with huge multiples, right? It doesn't quite work like that over here. I think majority of them are pretty grounded in reality, the valuations.
And what's the liquidity down there for, you want to start trading?
That's the biggest problem we have. I mean, there's days where there's $5,000, $4,000 that trades, 10,000s, and then on the occasion you get $100,000, $200,000. So it's you can't come in with $1 million and expect to close in a day or two, right? That's going to take some time to get through that kind of investment. So there's the big names; those ones do trade more frequently, but the volumes, I'd say they're not really there at the moment, but it's picking up slowly.
And like, do you have other US multinationals like Amazon and all of those companies down there?
No. So Amazon, no. You've got your sort of media companies. I think that's what we have here. Your sort of Amazon, meaning video-wise, Netflix, I'd say, is big over here. Then your social media companies, right? That's the primary players over here.
So it's mainly all in the digital space.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
That makes sense. Obviously,
yeah. So I mean, in terms of banks, it's dominated by the large sort of African banking groups, I'd say, as well. Standard Chartered is sort of the more global bank that we have over here.
So it definitely does seem like one of the elite growth areas in Africa relative to the incumbents. It does seem that way.
Yeah, I mean, all I'd say is just come and visit for a holiday, and you'll sort of see what I'm talking about. It's on a rapid sort of growth trajectory. As much as the numbers don't look like it, it's happening on the ground. As with Africa, a lot of things are informal, so the informal side is way bigger than the formal side. So it's on the ground.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of that, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, Raj. Guys. And if you like the content here today, please like and subscribe. Last video, we had over 1,000 views. So thank you so much for watching. And just spread the word, and we'll see you guys on the next one.